One of the things that we know about when students learn vocabulary, or indeed anything to do with language, is that they need to have many times when they see and hear the language, and also many opportunities for them to use the language. Using and remembering language is really important when you want to actually learn it more deeply. So, one of the things that I do to help learners with this is a little activity that I call recall. And this is something that I do at the beginning of every lesson. The idea is to get the students to remember what happened in previous lessons. And I do this by asking them questions like, what did we talk about yesterday? Or, can you remember the text you read? When I've asked them to remember the lesson and talk about it, it helps them to also remember the vocabulary or the grammar that I've taught them or that we've covered in the lesson. The point is that vocabulary and indeed grammar and functional language gets linked to topics in our mind, and therefore if we start by asking about the topics, this automatically prompts students to remember the language. From experience of doing this, I found that asking students to remember the topic is much more useful than asking them questions such as, can you remember the grammar we looked at yesterday? Or do you remember the vocabulary? Very often they find that harder than if they first start by saying, oh yes, yesterday we talked about holidays, or yesterday we read a text about somebody using a computer. If they can remember the context or the topic, it automatically or often helps them remember the vocabulary. And if they can't remember it, or they can't remember the grammar, I can prompt them, I can get them to remember it by saying, okay, do you remember what the person said? Or do you remember what was written about this? And through this process of reminding them of what we read or talked about or listened to, they will remember the language. If you do this regularly at the beginning of each lesson, the students get used to the idea that this is what's going to happen, and often they will start to do this automatically at the beginning of the lesson without you having to do much prompting and encouraging them. And overall, it proves to be a very useful way of helping them to get better at language.